Thanks for that. Again, comments and questions we'll save for the end of the evening. Do put them in chat, though. I don't expect myself or anyone to remember what I'm or you are thinking throughout the whole presentation. So go ahead and use that as a recording space, and when something comes up that's important to you.
And Toby, I just want to remind us all that the presentations are the intellectual property of the presenters. So please do not screenshot the material, record the material, or take any of the material and redistribute it or copy it. It's respectful, especially since some might also include anecdotal, situational case studies or information that has to do with survivors. We love that our organization and those that are on our virtual will respect that. Thank you.
And thanks for that note, Kelly, as well. That said, please do share what you've learned here this evening and help to educate those around you who couldn't be with us this evening or haven't registered for this event to join in the conversation. So all of that aside, I would like to share with those of you who may not know that as this is a priority theme for BPW Canada, under the leadership of our current board of directors and our president, Angie Godin, the anti-human trafficking task force members across the country and internationally, I would absolutely love for you to take a moment and just wave if your video's on and say hello to everybody kind of that way. Recognizing that you are here and you've done such fantastic work. Thank you for making this a priority, and thank you for working to keep this an engaged and powerful message that we keep sharing for the actions that need to come out of this to make things better for women and girls, and also for the men who this affects as well. I know our organization is highly focused on the lives of women and girls, but this affects not only all genders in terms of those who are trafficked, but certainly it affects the families of all of those as well. So this is a wider community issue that I am absolutely thrilled to be hosting this talk for this evening. So we have three wonderful speakers here with us this evening. And sorry, Susan or Sue, I'm not sure which you prefer, but
either's good.
All right. Okay, so
yeah.
Susan Orlando is the Deputy Director Minister of the Attorney General. She's also the Provincial Coordinator of Human Trafficking Prosecutions. We also have with us Detective Constable Tracy Tucker. She is the Ontario Provincial Police Human Trafficking Rep. Gareth Williams is, of course, the Courage for Freedom President, and also the former Vice President of Probation and Parole Association of Ontario. So you've heard enough from me. I think it's important, and I know we're a little bit ahead of schedule, but I'm not going to fill airtime just for fun. I'm going to hand the presentation now over to Sue. The floor is yours for 30 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Toby, and thank you everybody for inviting me to be here this evening. Just going to start sharing my screen. Everybody can see the slides? First slide? Great.
You bet, it looks great.
Excellent. So I'm going to be starting off just by talking a little bit about the criminal code law in Canada that pertains to the offense of human trafficking. And then I'm going to talk about the way in which prosecutors in Ontario prosecute human trafficking offenses from a victim-centered, trauma-informed approach. And that approach that we take is really part of an enhanced prosecution model we have here in Ontario for human trafficking offenses, which was formed and created when Ontario first started its anti-human trafficking strategy in 2017. And it's because of a significant influx of resources into our prosecution service here in Ontario more than any other province has had in recent years, that we were able to put together a team of dedicated human trafficking prosecutors that is unique to Ontario. Some other provinces have maybe one or two crowns who act as sort of a provincial coordinator or who prosecute human trafficking cases in addition to other types of prosecutions. But Ontario, we have the largest prosecution team, and we prosecute only human trafficking and sex trade offenses. And that has allowed us really since 2017 to build up some really great case law in Ontario and to work towards law reform in areas where there are gaps and improvements that can be made to not just hold offenders accountable, but also support survivors through the criminal court process, because it indeed is a very difficult process for victims of human trafficking to proceed through. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our team after I go through our approach to human trafficking prosecutions, but I wanted to start just with a general overview of what the criminal code offense in Canada involves, because, you know, we talk about human trafficking and some people may not be familiar with the actual offense in Canada that we have in our criminal code. And what the offense involves, and it's very broad, it was intentionally when the federal government wrote the human trafficking offense, they intentionally made it very broad to cover lots of different types of conduct that people often engage in when they traffic someone. And the offense itself is also broad in that it applies to any kind of labor or service. It does apply to sexual exploitation in the sex trade, but it's not limited to that. It can apply to any kind of labor or service. It could be migrant farm workers. It could be people who work in restaurants. It could be people who work in a nail salon. Potentially, if the elements of the offense are made out, it could be offense depending on what the accused person has done. So what the criminal code offense of human trafficking requires the Crown to prove is that the accused person committed just one of the prohibited acts that are listed in the criminal code section. And those acts could be any one of either recruiting, transporting, transferring, receiving, holding, concealing, harboring, or exercising control, direction, or influence over someone's movements. And in addition to doing any one of those things, the accused also has to do that thing for the purpose of exploiting or facilitating the exploitation of the victim. Now, the term exploiting has a particular definition in the criminal code. It's not the everyday definition that you and I are familiar with, which means to take advantage of somebody. And so when we're prosecuting human trafficking offenses and when the police are investigating human trafficking, they really have to be focused on determining whether the accused's intention when he did the prohibited act, whether it was transporting, recruiting, whatever it was, that they did it for the purpose of exploiting the victim or making it easier for somebody else to exploit the victim, where more than one person is working together with somebody else to exploit somebody. So what does exploitation mean then in the criminal code human trafficking offense? It means to cause somebody to either offer or provide a labor or service by engaging in conduct that in all of the circumstances could reasonably be expected to cause the other person to believe that their safety or the safety of a person known to them would be threatened if they either didn't provide or offer the labor or service. Now that's a mouthful and it can be very complicated. And when the legal provisions were first enacted by Parliament, there was a lot of confusion about what actually Parliament meant. A lot of people thought that basically the Crown had to prove that the victim was fearful and feared for their safety in order to prove the human trafficking offense. And that's not actually correct. And there are a number of cases that have decided that over the years that have made their way to our Court of Appeal that have interpreted this offense in a very generous way. And so what it essentially boils down to is Could the accused conduct, whatever it is that the accused said and did to the complainant over the course of the time they were together, could that conduct reasonably be expected to cause the complainant to believe that her safety or someone else's safety that they know would be threatened if she didn't provide the labor or service? And the criminal code sets out some factors that the judge has to look at and consider to determine whether the accused conduct could reasonably be expected to cause that fear in the victim. And some of those factors include whether the accused used violence, threats, or force, or another form of coercion, whether they used deception, so did they lie to the victim, or did they abuse a position of trust, power, or authority. But those aren't the only factors that can be considered. And again, the case law that's developed over the last 10 years or so in Ontario has expanded that, and really any relevant factor can be considered in determining whether the accused exploits the victim. For example, we see lots of cases where an accused person either gets the victim dependent on drugs, or maybe the victim was already dependent on drugs, and those drugs are used to exploit the victim, in that whenever the victim is meant to, provide the labor or service, the accused person holds drugs out to them, as if they do the labor or service, then they'll get the drugs that they're addicted to and that they need. That has been found in case law to be a means of exploiting somebody. In addition, in the labor trafficking context, when somebody threatens them to deport another person if they don't provide the labor or service, that also goes to whether the person was exploited. And also in the sex trafficking context, psychological pressure and coercion, especially when it's related to an intimate relationship that exists between the trafficker and the victim. So oftentimes we see either a real, domestic relationship between the trafficker and the victim. And oftentimes, though, the victim is made to believe that the trafficker actually loves her and wants to be with her, and that if she provides sexual services and gives him all the money, he's going to save it up, and they're going to have this wonderful life together, beautiful house, nice cars, all that stuff. And that doesn't come to fruition. Those are all things that have been recognized. Also, that deception, that basically exploiting the vulnerability that the victim has, in that she wants to please her partner, make him happy because she loves him so much and believes that he loves her, when that's not actually the case. Those are all things that have also been found to be means of exploiting another person. And so there's, again, some of the case law that's developed in Ontario has instructed judges that when they're looking at what kind of conduct or circumstances are relevant to assessing whether the accused conduct could reasonably be expected to cause the victim to fear for their safety. Again, you don't look at it from the perspective of, was the victim actually fearful? You look at it as what was the accused's purpose in doing the acts that he did to the complainant? And we make the argument that basically, of course, his purpose was to try to get her to provide the labor or service by doing things that would have caused a reasonable person in her circumstances to fear or harm. And it doesn't matter whether the victim was fearful or not, because again, the provision is meant to be broad so that it applies and it protects people who might be extremely vulnerable. And they may have lived such a hard life and seen really terrible things. And it might be that what the accused did to the victim in order to get her to provide sexual services might have, terrified you and I, but, didn't scare her, because she's so tough because of everything that she's experienced in her lifetime. And that is why Parliament has put the focus not on whether the victim was actually fearful, but what was the accused's purpose and intention in doing the things that he did to exploit to the complainant. And the focus is on whether it was his intention to exploit her. And some of the things the court looks at in determining the accused's intention was whether he was abusive, made threats, whether there was violence that he exhibited towards the complainant, whether there was physical, emotional, or psychological coercion, whether there was deception, whether he abused a position of trust, power, or authority, And what were the circumstances of the victim? Was she vulnerable? And if so, why? Is it because of her age or personal circumstances? Example, poverty, not having connection with family, being economically marginalized. Had she been victimized by previously and the accused knew about that? Was the victim isolated by the accused intentionally? What was the nature of the relationship between the accused and complainant? Did the accused direct the complainant to do various things? Was the accused either controlling or directing things related to the labor or the sex work in a case of sexual exploitation? Like, was it the accused who was determining how much would be charged for the sexual services and where they would be performed from? Who was in charge of advertising the sexual services? Whether there were limitations placed on the complainant's ability to move, who decided where she moved and when, who was in control of the money and her finances. Was he receiving any of the money that was being made from the labor or service? And was he controlling other aspects of her life, like, you know, her phone, her ability to talk to the outside world, the use of social media, etc. And so we see that the offense itself is broad enough to capture lots of different ways in which the human trafficking offense is committed, because it is in fact committed in different ways. Some traffickers are very brutal and they are physically violent. They may use firearms and they may repeatedly and horribly physically, sexually assault and emotionally abuse the victim. Others might not. Other traffickers, they may use, you know, exploiting a financial vulnerability. They may use exploiting a drug dependency. And again, they may use coercion, manipulation of an intimate boyfriend, girlfriend, or domestic relationship to achieve their ultimate means. And so the offense itself, again, applies to any labor or service, and it's intentionally broad to be able to capture as many people who are involved in the trafficking scenario who are helping one another to commit the offense. And I want to just make it clear, because there are some misconceptions about the criminal law as it pertains to human trafficking and the sex trade. Human trafficking is not the only offense in our criminal code that applies to offenses in the sex trade. There are also other offenses which used to be called the prostitution related offenses, but now since 2014, when our federal government rewrote the criminal code provisions, the old prostitution offenses that were struck down by the Supreme Court of Canada's decision in the case called Bedford, and they changed the whole regime by which we now understand the sex trade offenses to exist. What Parliament did at that time is they enacted what was called the Nordic model that exists in other countries around the world, such as France and other places. And what they did was they took a different view of prostitution, and they renamed it as basically the exchange of sexual services for consideration, because they recognized that prostitution itself, that language, that label, had a lot of negative stereotypes and value-laden sort of beliefs that used to exist with respect to people who engaged in prostitution. And what Parliament chose to do was to, whereas before the Bedford case was decided, prostitution was legal, but there were certain aspects of it that were illegal. Now, with the Nordic model that we have now in Canada, prostitution is actually illegal. So it's an offense for anybody to purchase or to communicate for the purpose of purchasing sexual services in exchange for something of value, whether it's money or consideration. But that doesn't mean that the seller, the person who provides the sexual services, can be charged or prosecuted, because Parliament decided to enact a model that made the sellers of sexual services, whether they're selling their own sexual services willingly or because they're being coerced or forced or trafficked to do it, the actual seller cannot be charged with a criminal offense because they are immune from prosecution. There's an immunity from prosecution built right into our criminal code. And the reason Parliament did that is that they did a whole paradigm shift when they enacted the new sexual services offenses in 2014, whereas before prostitution was seen as a nuisance offense. And now Parliament sees it as a form of sexual exploitation that disproportionately affects women and girls, and marginalized women and girls, Indigenous women and girls, people who are economically marginalized. And what Parliament saw fit to do was to try to eliminate prostitution altogether by, making it illegal to actually purchase sex. But they very much saw the sellers of sexual services as victims, people who need help to be able to exit the sex trade, whether they're there, because they need to be, because, they need to feed themselves and their families, or because they're being exploited in the sex trade. And so I want to make that clear, though, that those who are providing sexual services cannot be charged, whether they're a victim of human trafficking or not. And that's important because a lot of victims of human trafficking are told by their traffickers that if they go to the police, if they try to get out, that they're going to be charged and that they're doing something wrong. And that's not true. And that prevents a lot of victims from ever leaving or getting help or going to the police. And it's also an offense to advertise somebody else's sexual services, but it's not an offense to advertise your own sexual services. And again, there's an immunity from prosecution built in, so that sellers of sexual services, whether they're doing it independently or because they're being forced, coerced, trafficked, the act of advertising for them, as long as they're advertising their own sexual services, they can't be charged or prosecuted for that. But third parties who are engaged in arranging for another person to provide sexual services, and commercial businesses like escort agencies that are premised on the exchange of sexual services for money or something else of value, those are all illegal in Canada. So I want to just take a minute to talk about some of the challenges to investigating and prosecuting human trafficking, because these challenges are really the basis for the enhanced prosecution model that we have here in Ontario now. And we realize that because of these challenges that really don't exist with any other type of offense that we prosecute as prosecutors, whether it's sexual assault, domestic violence, child abuse, homicide, really human trafficking cases are unique, and that's why they need a unique and enhanced approach that is directed at these challenges and meeting these challenges. So first of all, our victims of this crime, and I use the word victim because that's what I'm used to. That's the term in the criminal code. Really, victim and complainant are used interchangeably. But I really do want to say that every victim of human trafficking is a survivor in my eyes. And it's an incredible feat to be able to, first of all, be able to speak to police and then ultimately testify in court about being victimized in this way. And I just want to acknowledge that. But in addition to being victims and survivors of human trafficking, most of our victims have experienced some other type of complex trauma in their past, and they therefore have significant needs that must be met owing to the previous trauma as well as to the trauma associated to the human trafficking. Victims are extremely reluctant to cooperate with police for a variety of reasons. Most human trafficking victims don't call the police to report that they've been trafficked. It's either, there's an emergency that happens, maybe something at a hotel where they're being exploited. They might be beaten up by the trafficker, or somebody sees something and calls it to the police. Could be a family member who calls the police because they're concerned about a loved one they believe is being trafficked. And oftentimes, police will be in an investigation, and it takes months and even years of building a relationship with that victim before she will disclose that she's been trafficked. There's other reasons why victims of human trafficking are reluctant to participate in the court proceedings. Oftentimes it's because of the way they've been treated in the past by police, by prosecutors, other times that they've been involved in the criminal justice system. And a lot of times it's the fear associated of the traffickers, right? The fear that they're going to be harmed if they actually tell police and testify in court what the trafficker did to them. So for that reason, many of our victims, even if they give a statement to the police under oath about the trafficking, they may come to court later and change their story and say that they lied to the police. And that is a significant challenge that is, somewhat rare. Happens more in domestic violence cases, but it's relatively more common in human trafficking cases. And that could also be because we have a lot of intimidation of our complainants and victims when they do go to the police and the trafficker finds out that they've been to the police. And oftentimes the trafficker or associates will reach out to the victim and either threaten them or, prey upon their feelings and ask them to basically, help out the accused and not testify in court. And so sometimes victims, they just flat out refuse. Some are too traumatized to actually, testify in court. Some, they might go back to their home community and go underground, and we can't find them by the time of court. And some sadly have passed away of drug overdoses and suicides between the time that they've reported to the police and before their court case. So, and that's not something that I ever experienced in my 25+ years of being a prosecutor. I've never had as many victims of a particular type of crime I've prosecuted die by suicide or drug overdose as I have specializing in this human trafficking work. And I think that speaks to the trauma that they've experienced and how hard it is for them to make it through the court process. The offense itself is often committed over a period of time, though it doesn't have to be. It could be on a single day or a few days or a weekend. And oftentimes victims are moved from one jurisdiction to another, although they don't have to be. A victim could be trafficked in one city. But when victims are moved around between cities, provinces, countries, it makes it harder for police to collect evidence. Another challenge is that oftentimes human trafficking will present itself as domestic violence. For example, a woman assaulted in a hotel and she tells the police when they get there she just had a fight with her boyfriend over money. She might not be ready at that time to tell the whole truth, that he was actually trafficking her and she didn't make enough money that night and that's why he beat her up. Similarly, some victims are robbed by either other traffickers or clients, or they're assaulted and sexually assaulted, and they come to the attention of police because that happens to them, but they're not willing to tell the police that they're also being trafficked. And in many cases, there are trauma bonds that form between the victim and the trafficker. And so it makes it very difficult for the victim to leave and or call for help. And especially when there's that domestic relationship too, a lot of victims feel conflicted. They know they've been wronged, but they also still love and feel very almost like they're betraying the accused by going to court and testifying about what happened to them. So how do we meet these challenges so that we can hopefully meet our goals under our provincial human trafficking strategy? There's 4 pillars in total. There's one relating to holding offenders accountable. Those are the initiatives that the police, you'll hear from Tracy, and that our prosecution team are focused on. And we have two real goals, which is to hold offenders accountable and support survivors through the court process. So firstly, what we've done in Ontario is we realize that as prosecutors, we really need to have specialized prosecutors who are really good at this, because this is what we do all the time. And that requires experienced prosecutors who are used to dealing with victims who are recanting or bringing complex legal application to potentially, lead evidence of the victim's statement to the police if she's died by the time of the trial, because we want to still be able to proceed with cases where we have sufficient evidence, even if the victim is not available to testify. And that's somewhat novel in our criminal justice system. Ordinarily, especially for the human trafficking offense, you need the victim to come to court to testify about what happened to them. And we're all trauma informed. Obviously, we realized to do this work, we have to understand trauma. And so at all of the training we've done for our team over the years, we've always learned about the neurobiology trauma, the impact of trauma on human behavior and memory, how trauma impacts survived victims, and also what it is about victims of human trafficking that makes them vulnerable to being trafficked. And it's really important to understand that so that we can understand the vulnerabilities that the accused preyed upon in order to exploit them. We take a victim-centered approach, which means the victim doesn't get to decide what happens with the case, because if they did, we wouldn't prosecute probably any human trafficking cases because none of them really want to go to court. Very few of our victims are, are at a point when they get to court where they feel they've recovered, they're healthy, they're ready to testify. Some are, and it's great, and we have terrific outcomes in court when that happens. But not everybody is there by the time of court, and that's why the supports that we have available are really important to be able to get them through the court process. And even somebody who's like recovered and doing, really well in their life, they also need supports too to get through the court process. And what we do is we meet the victim where they're at, we determine what their needs are, what supports are necessary, and we collaborate with the police, with the victim witness workers who are a team of, they work for the provincial government. They're within our Ministry of the Attorney General. They do court support and preparation of victims and witnesses for testimony. They're a friendly face in the courtroom that the victim can see when they're testifying. But we don't stop with our victim witness workers. We also allow and engage with community service providers who support the victims throughout the court process from beginning to end. So essentially, the Crown, police, VWAP, community service provider form a team, a supportive team around the victim from the beginning of the case to the end. Sometimes cases take 3 years or more to get through the court system, and we are regularly keeping in contact, checking in with the victim, assuming she wants us to, assuming she wants contact with us. Some victims, when the case first starts, they don't even want to think about court. They need to recover. They need to go for trauma counseling. They might need substance abuse treatment, whatever it is. So again, this is about being trauma informed. When they're ready to meet us, that's when we engage and we support them throughout the court process. Part of that support is reducing the victim's fears as much as possible about what court is going to be like by explaining what it's going to be like, showing them what the courtroom looks like, understanding what their fears and concerns are about testifying, and explaining how the system works and what we as prosecutors can do to make them feel more comfortable. So for example, usually in a human trafficking case, the accused will choose to have a preliminary hearing, which is a procedure in our criminal law for more serious offenses. And what that means is the victim would have to testify at the preliminary hearing and then at the trial. That's twice. It's really hard to get victims of human trafficking to testify even once, especially young victims and those who are very vulnerable. And so we can take steps as prosecutors to basically, even though the accused wants to have a preliminary hearing, to bypass the preliminary hearing. It requires us to do a certain application and get the consent of the Attorney General, but we do that in a lot of our human trafficking cases. We also explain to the victim the court process and all of the protections that are in place. For example, publication bans, because some victims are really fearful about their name getting published in the media and that they were trafficked. And so we explain that that can't happen. Also, there's protections in place for defense counsel being able to cross-examine victims about their sexual history unrelated to the case before the court if it's a sex trafficking case. And also, there are protections over personal information that the victim has. So for example, if she had a diary that she provided to the police that was relevant to the case, or if she had a cell phone that contains some evidence that the police received as evidence, we don't allow the police to look at everything in the phone in order to collect the evidence that's related to the offense. And even if the police do have to look at it, then we vet that out before we provided the stuff that's not relevant to the case, before we provide it to defense counsel, so that personal information isn't just, going to the, so irrelevant personal information isn't going to come out in court. We also try to find out what supports the victim needs, and make application to the court for those. Some victims want to have a support person sitting close beside them, or a support dog, or testify by video. It's more difficult in our criminal code to get the order for testifying by video if you're an adult victim as opposed to a child. That's something we've been trying to advocate for change for, but we do make those applications, and we have been successful in many cases, because it is very hard for a victim of human trafficking to testify from inside the same courtroom as the trafficker, because they still feel the control that they were under of the trafficker when they're testifying. And oftentimes that means the victim can't get her whole story out because she's just too scared and get anxious by the fact that he's there watching her testify and talking about all of the things that he did. So just briefly, I know my time is, I think, up. I just want to tell you a little bit about what we focus on. We really have three parts of our real focus to our enhanced prosecution model. The first being bail, which is when a person is arrested for any criminal offense, then bail has to be determined. So are they staying in jail until their trial, or are they going to be released into the community on conditions that they're going to keep the victim safe and ensure that they don't interfere with witnesses? And so we recognize that with human trafficking victims, they feel safer and they're more likely to testify at trial when the accused is in custody and there's less witness intimidation, although it still happens from jail. Traffickers will still call victims from jail. And so we try really hard to keep the accused person in jail. And we also make sure the victim understands that if there's anybody contacting her, breaching a bail condition, threatening her, she has to tell the police right away, and the police action that right away. And there's additional charges that can be laid for breaching bail conditions and intimidating a witness in a case. Secondly, we focus the police on collecting as much evidence as possible. So not stopping just with the victim's statement, but trying, without investigating the complainant, look at the main parts of her experience and what happened to her, and try to independently confirm those things by getting independent evidence. And that's because we'll have a stronger case, and it'll be more likely that the Crown will prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt if we have that additional evidence. And if the victim either changes her story, or she passes away, or can't be found by the time of trial, that independent evidence is what is going to allow us to be able to make the legal applications we need to make to the court to still admit enough evidence to be able to prosecute the case without the victim. And thirdly, we are focused on taking as much of the profit out of this crime as possible by having any assets that we're able to trace back to the accused, either being proceeds of crime or offense-related property, or if the accused has cash, or maybe he's arrested in a very fancy car and we can prove that car is proceeds of crime or offense-related property, then we'll apply to the court to take those things from him if he's convicted, and then we use that money to pay restitution to the victims when we can. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a team of 15 Crowns across the province who prosecute only human trafficking and sex trade offense cases, and we are located in all of the major centers or major offices where there is the highest volume of human trafficking cases in the province. So that's Toronto, Ottawa, Peel, Durham, Newmarket. But we also have a regional human trafficking Crown in every region of the province, so that no matter where a human trafficking charge is laid by the police, whether it's a small town, large town, medium size, our Crowns are available to prosecute the case and also to support the local Crowns who may be prosecuting the case, because there are too many cases, unfortunately, for our team to do all of them across the province. So what we've done is we've trained Crown attorneys in every single one of our 54 Crowns offices in the same trauma-informed, victim-centered approach that our team does. And that way we have consistency across the province, and hopefully the victims, no matter where they are, receive the same level of service from the prosecuting Crown as if a member of our team was prosecuting the case. And so what we've seen, just in summary, is that over the last I guess since 2017, when our team was formed, we have been able to prosecute cases where previously we wouldn't have been able to do it. We've been able to get convictions in cases where previously, before we had our team, we wouldn't have been able to. And we've developed a really good body of case law in Ontario that now other provinces are using in their prosecutions as well. And our Court of Appeal has generally said that the range of sentencing for human trafficking where there is one victim is 4 to 8 years, but that range has been increasing in the last few years, and that even if there are aggravating features, a particular case could merit a sentence of more than 8 years. And so in the last number of months, we've had cases with 12-year sentences imposed after trial, 9-year sentences, and we're trying to increase the sentences imposed for this offense. And in multi-victim cases, we've had sentences of 15 years imposed as well, where there have been 4 or more victims. We have a couple of cases before the court right now with large number of victims where there were guilty pleas. We're also seeking very high sentences. And dangerous offender applications. So seeking to have offenders who are repeat traffickers or very violent traffickers designated
Susan,
a
I hate
dangerous.
to interject because we could absolutely, I could listen to you for so much longer. I really appreciate all of this and not intending to cut you off, but unfortunately we do have to scoot into our next chat.
Sure, no problem.
I cannot say thank you enough, though, for sharing such fabulous information. There's not a common lay understanding, of course, of legislation and understanding the complexities of the law surrounding human trafficking, being the nature of the crime being so much more complex, such a spider web of issues to deal with. And thank you for all of your service in that regard for many years. Really appreciate your time today.
You're welcome.
With that, and folks, if you've got questions for Susan, as I do, I'm sure you do, please don't forget to put those in the chat, write a note. We're going to come back to those after, but right now I'm going to pass the floor over to Detective Constable Tracy Tucker. Tracy, you've got the floor for 20 minutes. Thank you. Okay.
Oh, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, could you see my screen when I shared it?
I could, yes, yeah.
Okay, because I can't hear you when I do that.
Nobody
Okay.
was talking, I don't think.
Yeah, I think we were just being quiet.
Okay, let me do this again. Okay.
I'll keep chatting a little bit, Tracy, while you share your screen just to make sure
that
Oh yeah, there's the
double back.
And then you're
on.
Tracy,
You're mute.
Can you hear me okay?
Can you hear me okay? Try.
Oh, hang on. Tracy
on text.
So Tracy, have you sent your to Gareth? He can screen share because we're verbing.
Oh, maybe it's just
Oh,
me.
maybe it's just me.
You're muted.
Okay, you can hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And you can see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Tracy. As you can see on your screen, I am part of the Ontario Provincial Police Anti-Human Trafficking Investigation Coordination Team. We are also part of the Intelligence-Led Joint Forces Strategy, which is the strategy for Ontario that combats human trafficking, which was brought into place, as Sue said, 2017 to 2020-ish was when our teams became operational. And so in the province of Ontario, we have an East team, a West team, a Central team, and a Northern team. Each team is joint forces with municipal. So I'm on the East team, which would be 3 OPP officers, an OPP sergeant. We have a Kingston police officer, an Ottawa police officer, an Akwesasne police officer. And then we also have embedded analysts. So analysts would take evidence that we gather, let's say phone, if we get data through a production order for somebody's phone, they connect the dots, help us connect the dots so that we can show evidence that, let's say, the trafficker is talking to the victim, the trafficker is talking to other traffickers, the trafficker is talking to Airbnb or hotels or things like that. And an analyst can make charts of people who are involved, connect the dots that way and show it on a chart, which helps people to see connections when they're just coming into it, helps Crown attorneys see who's involved and how they're connecting a little bit more easier. And we also have intelligence officers embedded in our teams that assist us by utilizing platforms that we've developed through the strategy, where we can distribute pictures of people, pictures of vehicles, let's say pictures of hotel rooms, things like that, and ask across the province if anyone has dealt with these individuals, know the vehicle, know a building, etc., that can help us again connect the dots and keep databases for us so that we can utilize those, because what we're finding very often is individuals that are involved in this, whether it's the pimps or the victims or survivors, we come across them over and over and over again. So that's kind of the gist of the teams. The strategy is coming up next year, so 2025. So things might change a little bit, but as of right now, that's how we operate. So this is a little bit more about the strategy. I, again, will talk about females when I talk about sex trafficking, and males when I talk more so within labor. We're seeing a lot more labor trafficking and have had a lot more labor trafficking investigations in the last couple of years. But as you can see, and as Sue mentioned, vulnerabilities in terms of women and girls with the sex trafficking, and I will say, in my experience, more men in terms of the labor trafficking. I won't go through this. I'll just let you read as I go along. The other thing I just wanted to talk about is that there's 3 laws that were developed within the strategy for us. They're provincial laws, and what they have allowed us to do. The number the first one is with regards to youth under the age of 18. It used to be that when, let's just use an example, if we were to get a call to a hotel room for a nuisance party, domestic, that kind of thing, and we showed up at this hotel and we had an individual in the room that was over the age of 16, there was basically nothing we could do. We could talk to them, with flags of human trafficking. We could try, but basically if they didn't want to talk to us, there was nothing that we could do. We had to just leave them there, because over the age of 16, they also don't have to engage with child and family services. The new law that came into effect allows us now to pull an individual out that is 16 and 17 years old, so under the age of 18. And so what that allows us to do, and we talk about vulnerabilities, one of the things Sue also mentioned was building rapport and how long it takes investigating officers to build rapport with these individuals is extremely difficult and takes a long time to do. And so this can be a starting point for us, is that we get that opportunity to take these individuals out of the situation they're in, and helps us to start that rapport building or continue rapport building if it's a secondary interaction or a third or fourth time. So that was one of the laws that came into effect. The second one is the ability for us to go into hotel rooms, into hotels. Hotels now have to keep a log and ensuring that they have all the information of people who are renting rooms from them. And if it's a situation where someone's in immediate danger, or we believe that they're being trafficked or at risk of being trafficked, then we can utilize this law to get information from the hotel right away, and utilize production orders to get subsequent information off the information that they provide to us. And so that has helped us a lot, again, in connecting dots, gathering information so that we can try and track down someone who is at risk more quickly. And again, utilize the information for investigative purposes and forward through the court process if that's where it comes to. And the third one is the HT restraining order. And so there is a lady in Ontario by the name of Kelly Beale who takes care of this. She was with Meg. I think she's still with Meg, and Sue, you might be able to correct that. But she is a lawyer, and she works on behalf of victims of human trafficking. And so if the individual doesn't want to have anything to do with police, then that individual, we can refer them to Kelly, as can we refer their families. So it can be a third party application if they have all the information with regards to the person who's exploiting, let's say their child, their sibling, etc. And she will work with that individual to get a restraining order should they want that. And so not only is it stay away from the person, not communicate, it's not having any pictures, because typically we see that the pimps will utilize individuals' pictures for other people that they're trafficking. They will utilize the pictures and videos for sale and things like that. So that is a very good option for us if, like Sue said, some of the individuals just don't want to go through the court process and it's too much for them. But this is a way that we can try to ensure some protection and also helps us as investigators. I can give you an example. We went into got a HT restraining order for an individual, it goes on our database. So anytime you deal with the person who has the restraining order, then we know that they can't have communication or be with that person, have pictures, etc. We did a drug warrant at a hotel, and the drug officers knew that there was this HT restraining order. When they went in, there was pictures of a female, got in touch with us, and we were able to confirm that it was the individual, and we were able to breach them on breaching a court order. So although it's a Ontario law, we can use the criminal code to charge them when they're breaching the court order. So those are the three things that came into effect with the strategy that help us out a lot with our investigations. I won't go through this because Sue already did, but just note that, and again, Sue mentioned this, the biggest thing that we're looking for when we're investigating human trafficking is the exploitation of the person or facilitating their exploitation. Because we do deal with independent workers, there are offenses under the criminal code that we can deal with that don't have exploitation components. That is when they're helping with ads, procuring or talking them into doing this, things like that. But what we most try to do, our number one goal is to try and get that exploitation piece, so that when sentencing comes or conviction, sentencing after conviction comes, we can try and get a little bit more time. So I won't go through this again because Sue did. I will mention this. So withholding or destroying documents, we do see this a lot in terms of labor trafficking, where individuals are brought here to work, whether it's to be a nanny in agriculture, construction, things like that. And when they get here, their documents for travel are taken away from them. I had a case in Mallory Town that I helped York with, where an individual was bringing people that he knew from Mexico here to work on what he told them was a hacienda. So they thought it was these elaborate farms that they were going to be living on. And when they got here, it was vastly different. They were here to take care of dogs and run puppy mills for this individual. So the three types of human trafficking we deal with through our investigations, again, labor, sex, there is a component for organ trafficking. Have I seen it in the 26 years that I've been with the OPP? And I've been doing the human trafficking thing since 2016. I have not seen that. It's more of an international thing, but it does fall under our umbrella, as does forced marriages now. So I'm just going to go through a little bit of labor trafficking stuff. And I like I said, this has come up more and more. The recruiter, usually it's for bringing them to Canada to work. We do see mostly international being brought here where there's a language barrier. So they don't know how to communicate that things are wrong with them. There's also a fear of the people, their families back home, because a lot of times these individuals come over to Canada to work to send some money back to their family. And when this doesn't happen, depending on where they're from, there could be violence, threats against them for not sending back the money that they were supposed to come here to make. And so there's a lot of different things that these individuals have to worry about for themselves. So again, I'm just going to let you read. And if you have questions about this at the end, this is just an example of from a case that was in Simcoe County, of the living conditions that the individuals of that labor investigation had to live in. And again, so when these individuals come out, they need are able to get out, and we're able to help them. Again, not necessarily through court processes, but through community organizations to help them get closed, to help them get medical treatment. The places that they live in are infested with lice, with bed bugs, with things like that. And so ensuring that they get proper medical care, and whether they're here illegally or here legally on a work visa or a student visa, when they stop working, they get that taken away from them. So the community resources for them are huge. And we just had a case in Kingston where it was wonderful. The one female was pregnant, so she was able to get midwives to help her with no fee. The member of parliament in that area helped them to get their visa back quicker because they were victims of human trafficking. And Ministry of Labor were able to utilize their laws and get the individuals back $190,000 that they were owed for back payment for their labor. So it was great. Indicators, I'll let you quickly read through that. This is things that we look for. Again, we talk about flags with sex trafficking. This is some flags to look for when dealing with individuals for labor trafficking. And so sex exploitation, a little bit into the Ontario situation here. Ontario is huge for sex trafficking because of our 400 series highways. No other province has a circuit basically like Ontario with the connection of all the 400 series highways. And it's easy to transport the victims from place to place. And we are seeing the average age of recruitment now is even less than 13, sometimes 12, because of the social media component. Pimps can sit in their basement now on a phone and recruit on Instagram, on Snapchat. And that's what we're seeing now. They're not necessarily, you know, out on a street corner or in malls or things like that. We talked about marginalization, well suited in terms of why individuals become marginalized. And I can tell you too, the other factor that I see a lot of is when individuals are involved with the CAS and they're placed in group homes, and they bring other individuals from bigger centers into the group homes. There's recruiting there. And I'm sorry, I'm just going to let my dog out because he's making noises. Okay. So yeah. And we're also seeing that, like Sue said, with the mental health and addiction issues, that sexual services are being sold for smaller amounts when the pimp is able to exploit these individuals who have the addiction issues, have some mental health issues, and so they're able to exploit through that way. So indicators, I can tell you that these indicators stay the same. We now have teams that are looking into stolen vehicles. Their first weekend was this weekend, and we had a lot of calls from the teams basically saying that, you know, they had individuals in the car. They were concerned for the females in the car. There was a lot of indicators of trafficking, or that they were possibly being exploited, mostly for the that there was hotel receipts in the car, a lot of fast food wrappers, vehicles were stolen, or rental vehicles, no identification, no money, didn't know where they were coming from, don't know where they're going to. no luggage, if their story was that they were going away for the weekend, that kind of thing. And so it's very good that we now have, you know, the education piece for everybody, that we're getting out there and giving all the information to other officers who are frontline. And they're able to utilize that and get the information back to us.
Tracy,
So,
with time,
I can go quickly. This is actually my last slide. So this is basically our unit. We have the education piece. I talked about the coordination and intelligence, victim-centered approach. Proactive would be big multi-jurisdictional investigations. Reactive would be like this weekend when we're getting information from patrol officers. This is just a video, and we do social media awareness a couple times a year. This was a video. It's Carly Church, if you know her, talking about her situation when she got up. And in 10 days, these were the numbers that were received in 10 days. So it just shows you that people are out there, people are looking. People know about human trafficking now. We're seeing so many more community resources out there that we're able to utilize, and which is really great. And it's really great so that we can help the victims that need us out there. So that's my information. If you need to contact me, if you have further questions after this is over, you can email me and I'll get back to you. Cell phone, leave me a message, I'll get back to you. And then that's it.
Thank you so much for that. There's so much material in there, some very key, important data for us to be aware of, and certainly those indicators. You know, there's, again, another evening could be spent just hearing from you and your experience so that we can move forward better together. So thank you very much for your time, Tracy. I'm going to pass the floor over now to Gareth, and please don't forget to post those questions in the chat. We can come back to talking to both Susan and Tracy again in the Q&A period at the end of Gareth's presentation. So the floor is yours, Gareth, for 10 minutes. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. So today I kind of wanted just to come with more of an anecdotal kind of discussion of experience that I have been fortunate and somehow, of course, indirectly unfortunate to be able to experience. So I just wanted to kind of start out and discuss, yes, so as I was introduced, currently I do sit on the board of directors for Courage for Freedom as president currently. I started out with the board of directors with Courage for Freedom and working in tandem here with Kelly in 2021. But I just kind of wanted to bring about how human trafficking really has come into, I guess, my personal life, my professional life, and how it's kind of all intermingled. So I also, as it was kind of noted there earlier on, I used to previously work within the Solicitor General, the Ministry of the Solicitor General. And in doing so, I was the probation and parole officer. So I was able to work in kind of various different offices within the Ottawa courthouse downtown. So again, very specific demographic to a downtown area. And as well, I was able to go further up north. If anyone knows Kenora, 2.5 hours further north was in Red Lake, and that's where I was at for a little while. So I was working with Indigenous fly-in remote communities. Again, completely different experience, completely different demographic, and of course, what I was able to experience there. And then lastly, I was down in the Kingston area, so local enough for some of you I know. And in my experience there with human trafficking, working as a probation and parole officer, this is where I was starting to personally see some of those gaps. I was noticing some of these things about, clientele that were on my caseload. Yes, notably, they are offenders when they come into my caseload, getting onto probation or parole. You've gone through the courts, and now you're on, the conditions being able to be out in the community. And that's where I was seeing some of these gaps. So I was fortunate to also be the vice president of an organization, POAO, which is Probation Officers Association of Ontario, and that is for adult and youth probation officers. And in doing so, seeing this gap more and more in the caseload that I was supervising, which is more the intensive, highest risk offenders, as well as the human trafficking caseload, this is where I was noticing I did not know what to do. I was seeing there was large gaps in, oh my goodness, this person is in front of me. I have no idea what to do next. I don't know what to say. I don't know who to contact because this is above me, right? And so this is where I was fortunate. I was able to, in 2021, reach out to Kelly. And, you know, it was a quick Google. She comes up pretty quick. And I flagged, hey, I'm here kind of representing POAO, probation officers. We need some help here. I've reached out further up the chains, the Assistant Deputy Minister's office. We've acknowledged, hey, here's some gaps. Of course, I still work within the OPS. Things move a little slower. So it was very fortunate we're able to bring Kelly in here. And what law enforcement is seeing, and this is a bit of a different take than, of course, with Tracy there. With police, things are different. Of course, with probation, it's a little less front and center, right? It's reactive. It's once the crime has already happened, it's gone through the courts. Now they are coming to us in probation and parole. But nonetheless, and again, this would be what I would say anecdotally, about 20% of who I was seeing on my caseloads for probation and parole, I would say anecdotally 20% was human trafficking directly or indirectly related. Now, when I say direct, of course, we can understand that. Indirect, more so is those tertiary crimes. That's where I'm seeing a client come through my caseload. They're labeled as offender on my case, but I'm looking at this and they have multiple fraud charges. I see that there was issues with OSAP, and I see that they're coming in with one assault, multiple frauds, and things aren't really adding up. So this is where I'm starting to reach out to Kelly and saying, hey, something's a little funny here. I'm not really seeing what's going on. I don't have the full picture. I need some support. So in doing so, working in tandem with Kelly, it was great. We were able to get, I think it was actually 3 different training opportunities for probation officers, both, again, youth and adult, because as we see, you know, as Tracy noted here, the age is not 18 plus for adult probation and parole officers. What we do understand is if they're engaged and victims are becoming entrenched and brought into the, you know, the world of trafficking, of the deviant lifestyle, that subculture, that's at 12, 13. By the time they're getting to 16, 17, youth probation, adult probation, for those, you know, we sometimes coin that they graduate from youth to adult probation. That's a heavy entrenchment after years, formative years in their teen years coming in, right? So this is where we needed that help, right? So I'm going to kind of run with a bit of a case, anecdotal kind of case story here. I did have an individual on my caseload, being able to flag and see, hey, this is something that's a little bit more. This is something that's tingling. The limited knowledge I had at the time, this seems like trafficking, right? So in that, I was able to connect up to both Kelly Franklin here, of course, and as well as Tracy noted, Kelly Beal, who does do the human trafficking restraining orders. And I do believe she was with MAG, which is the Ministry of the Attorney General, and I think her position was moved to permanent within the MCCSS. Oh, for the life of me, it's the Children Community Safety, Social Safety, something. Yeah, sorry, MCCSS. But her position there, I was able to work with Kelly Beal to be able to get a human trafficking restraining order for this client that I was working with, which was great. It was the first one for East Region, and it was the 5th one in the province, as Kelly Beal was still creating this and developing this. And in doing so, this is where we were able to flag this. Now this is put on and it was successful, which was great. Now it's an extra additional measures to create that safety for the victim. In doing so, that also, which I learned and understood, puts basically a flag on the criminal record or the CPIC hit. If a cop, you know, pulls someone over, runs their name, they're able to see that this HTRO, human trafficking restraining order, is flagged on the offender, the trafficker's name as well. So that is where this really became a bit of a passion of mine, because I was seeing multiple cracks and gaps that was going on, right? And through no fault of anyone specific, this is just something that has crept up deviantly in society. And now we're trying to react to this, right? But this is where this victim, unfortunately, was taken down the 401 corridor. And that's where I was seeing pings of her pop up within Kingston, Napanee, Trenton, Belleville, Oakville, Durham, Peel, Niagara, St. Catharines, Bruce County, and I think coming back through Barrie area. Now that was about a 3-week trip. This is where I was reaching out to each police officer. There's about 4 or 5 of them that had this. They were flagged. I said, hey, I'm the PO. There are HT concerns. I have an HTRO. This is concerning, flagging this for you. Unfortunately, it wasn't seen as strongly and was not flagged as human trafficking, and it was more so sloughed off. Either 1 is domestic and 2 more commonly is drug trafficking. Now, again, no fingers pointed, because literally 6 months beforehand, a year beforehand, I had no idea as well, right? But this is really what's speaking to the amazing support where Sue is able to push this forward from the Crowns, right? Tracy, and of course, you know, the task force is able to push this forward from OPP. And this is where, again, through POAO, with Kelly coming in to train, this is where it's really helpful to have probation officers aware of this as well, right? Because probation is kind of off to the side. Same thing with CAS, addiction, mental health, AMHS workers, right? This is kind of those side services, still frontline, but things are kind of getting missed now with caseworkers who are following them month to month, sometimes years. This is where we're able to kind of connect some of this. So it was great to be able to see some of the signs of trafficking, being able to see and understand this as a probation officer. All right, so I'm understanding that the offender, the trafficker, is calling into the shelters demanding that they give her services when he in fact is the reason she's there, the fact that he is the abuser, right? This is the psychological manipulation games that are played, and this is what's going to confuse service workers, right? And grantly so. So I was able to see that making demands out of probation, making threats against managers of probation offices because he is not getting his way for what he wants for her, right? Which is basically just released in contact again. Jumping between offices and addresses so that they are lost in the cracks. Between 2 years, we were able to go back into our system, and I was able to record 36 different address changes within a 2-year window when I first did it. Of course, that's grown from there. That's a massive red flag as well, right? Local churches, we had pastors and priests calling on behalf of the trafficker, saying how great of a person he is, saying how much they're trying to help him. Again, this speaks to the charm, the manipulation that traffickers are persisting, right? Again, he was also on probation. I was then subsequently sometimes at points his probation officer. Of course, that did not go well for him. He did not like that because I was able to understand and see clearly. But again, this is probably where the managers got involved and I got complaints and threats. But hey, that's how this works sometimes, right? Especially when you're holding individuals accountable to the manipulation that comes through. All right, so, but these are some of just the small nuggets that you see. So if you're involved or have an experience with someone who is experiencing the victimization of human trafficking, this is where it's going to come up of, I saw this one thing, but it doesn't really sit well with me, right? If there's case management for whatever position it is, of course, you see some continuity, but absolutely I can understand if a police officer pulls someone over on the side of the road, you have a very short window of time to try to have an informed, educated decision per se, right? And especially because, as it's already been stated, these, stereotypically it is girls, but these women are told what to say, right? It is scripted. So it is very easy to say, to hear that, what it is, the script that's going on, because it's quite repetitive, right? And sometimes you even catch them where they're leaving voicemails for the probation officer, I can't report. And I hear him saying what she should hear and say, and then she says it to me on a voicemail. I'm like, come on, guys, right? So it's just, these are some of the small things that you see, right? It's sometimes the tertiary crimes like fraud, weapon possession, drug possession, right? Things just don't add up. It's not just overtly always going to be a sex exploitation or the sexual assault, right? Or it's the frauding, the laundering of the money, putting her name in for CERB. The amount of people that I talked to during COVID and CERB was not going to them. Same thing with ODSP, OW, OSAP was usually one of the big things as well that I was seeing, and it comes up as fraud. And again, this perpetuates some of the difficulty for any other law enforcement to understand, hey, I see a guy here with fraud, I see thefts. Human trafficking is not going to flag first and foremost in their mind, right? And of course, that makes sense. But that, again, is the experience and manipulation of the trafficker knowing exactly intentionally what it is that they're doing. They know to jump from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. They know to jump from probation office to probation office, right? And of course, with Tracy's task force now, OPP, it's provincial. This is helping to combat this, but this is what is, we are seeing. So to kind of conclude here, I wanted to get a little bit of an experience here of what this could look like or sound like. And this is really my last piece and push. Of course, I am biased as sitting on the board of directors with Courage for Freedom, but this is the importance behind the work that is currently ongoing with Kelly and more amongst herself to affecting that policy change, right? The legislative change, talking to the MPPs, right? This is the work that is going to have a trickle effect for legislation to change. Right. And that's what Sue was talking about earlier. This is how now we're able to connect other people, that education and information and awareness, just by people talking about this. Right. I've now actually left probation. I'm working with Meg with the Ministry of the Attorney General. And I'm still getting probation officers fire me an email and saying, hey, I do your HT. Who do I contact? Like, I don't know, but I can get someone in contact with you, So those are the small things there where we need those connections, right? So even if you may not know, hey, Kelly's a good reach out, Tracy, Sue, right? All of this. So these are some of those impactful changes. And this is where I see, obviously, with BPW here in this area, this is where some of those pushes to government make changes that Frontline will see. Right. So these are some of the small pieces here I just want to bring forward, bring a little bit of an anecdotal kind of conclusion to of course, Tracy and Sue, who are doing a lot more direct work, and very appreciated. But thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Gareth. And what a great way to really bring that information together and know that everyone's working in consort, and bringing your experience in a couple of different roles is absolutely wonderful to bring to the group this evening. So I do want to jump into a bit of a Q&A, and I think maybe if we can do a bit of a panel to start with. There's a lot of questions that have come in the chat, and continue to post those in. If they don't get answered, perhaps there's some way we can gather them and incorporate those into future things, but we'll try and get to as many as we can. If we can just kind of one or two quick sentences to answer these questions, and then bounce it around amongst the speakers that we have here, Gareth, Susan, and Tracy, amongst yourselves. First off, what's one experience that you are able to share, and whether it's positive or maybe not so positive, that's come up in your field with respect to anti-human trafficking survivors, the law and legal systems, that you think public and organizations like BPW or others could benefit from hearing about and understanding, like a case study or personal reflection, something that really pops to mind that you want to leave us with this evening? Who'd like to go first? Jump right in. All right, Gareth, I'm bouncing it to you.
I was going to say I'll go.
I'll let Tracy go.
Wonderful, thanks.
So I can tell you, I would say the last 5 years, just before COVID and then through COVID and into the last 2 years, the amount of resources that we are getting for helping people who are wanting to get out, again, not necessarily in terms of prosecuting a court case or anything like that, but just to help them get out. But what I'd like to see, and where I think we're struggling a lot with right now, is where do these individuals go? Especially when they're just getting out, there's huge addiction issues, mental health stuff going on, all of the trauma backgrounds from these individuals. And fair enough, there are places that we can place them when they're ready to go, in terms of like Deborah's Gate and Safe Hope Homes. And I mean, there's so many places like that where they have to be ready to go to basically change their life. But in that exigent circumstance where we need somewhere right now, that's the huge hole that I'm seeing. And then, you know, we get firsthand, or if a probation officer has them and we're reaching out and we can get them clothes and we can get them this, and we might have a place for them to stay for a couple nights, and then what? Like, there's a huge hole right there. And I think the next focus of where do we go from here is that immediate, okay, we're out, and now what do we do? We've got the next phase after that, but that's where I can see groups like BPW. And I mean, I think you probably see it too, Sue. Like, you go in and you build all this rapport, and you're like, okay, we can get this for you and we can get that for you. And then they're like, okay, but now where do I stay? And then they don't have a job. They need money. And what do they know?
Thanks,
They
Tracy.
know, yeah.
That's a really important thought. And maybe you introed Sue to that thought. I'll bounce it over to you, Susan. Oh, Mike.
Sorry about that. That actually was what I wanted to talk about, is that the outcome of the prosecution is very much tied to the survivor getting the support that she needs throughout the life of the case and beyond. Because when we have a healthy, stable survivor, then it'll be more likely that they will testify well, that the court will, accept their evidence, and that the offender will be held accountable at the end of the day. And some of the things that are needed that maybe BPW can assist with is, education opportunities, or training opportunities, or employment opportunities for survivors of human trafficking, partnering maybe with a community organization, so that if somebody, has exited and they really want to be a makeup, artist or a hair designer, and they need to be able to get those skills necessary to be able to get that job, so that they can support themselves and their family and not get back into a situation where they're engaging in sex work or they're trafficked again. Because we know a lot of victims go back. We hear stats that it takes 7 times, I think 7 or 17, I can't remember, for a human trafficking survivor to actually
11.
leave. Is it 11? I don't know, but
Yeah.
it's very common for victims to go back. And a lot of times, again, they come from poverty, their vulnerability is exploited. They're made to believe that they're going to get out of poverty by doing this work that is going to make them all this money, which they never end up seeing. And they end up poor. Pretty much all of our victims, by the time they get to court, they don't even have money to pay for their lunch or coffee when they're at court. So I feel like focusing on getting the survivor the financial support she needs, like whether it's housing long-term, is key. And those employment opportunities, right? So that they can get a job and, live a pro-social and happy life. And on top of that, as Tracy was saying, fentanyl and other drugs are really, the victims who are addicted to fentanyl, it's very hard to get them out, and it's very hard for them to go somewhere where their addiction can be treated. And that is the hardest part I find with the victims who are addicted to fentanyl and other really serious drugs, is getting them to get the help that they need to be able to overcome their addiction, because it's such a deadly drug. It's what's killing a number of human trafficking survivors who do get out. They relapse, and then they end up passing away. And I do feel like that's part of the reason I feel like, yes, we need to prosecute this offense and hold offenders accountable, but really we need to prevent people from ever getting trafficked in the first place, because it causes so much harm and damage. I've seen too many women and girls die who have been exploited, and those that survive, many of them, their life is not a life that, they wanted for themselves, or anybody else would want for them, or any family member would want for their child, because they're traumatized, they're addicted, they're, self-harming, they have mental health issues, and it just goes on if they can't heal from their trauma. So,
yeah.
Thanks, Susan. And Gareth, did you have some thoughts either to that or something else that you'd like to share that you feel would be relevant for us to know about from your experience?
I should have gone first. Tracy stole the thunder there. The other piece I did have in my mind is more so it focuses what I experienced frontline is the understanding and just building that understanding of one, trauma informed, but yet again having it human trafficking trauma informed. That is where I see a bit of a focus and need, because you can be trauma informed, absolutely, that is beneficial. However, working with someone who has been trafficked,
Yeah,
it's different. It is completely different. And some of the main big three that we see within probation, right, from my experience, is domestic violence, sexual offending, and then now human trafficking. Very different. So it's sometimes a little bit of that push and that need for any agency, any frontline agency, probation, victim services, police, anybody, just to have that understanding, one, trauma informed, but the trafficking trauma informed, and how that is absolutely going to be a complex matter to attend to for a victim survivor coming forward, right? It's going to look and be different than what we have kind of generally gone through historically with law enforcement. But yeah, and then of course what Tracy said.
can I say a happy note though? Do you want to add a happy
Yes.
note? Okay.
Oh, yes.
So I'm going to tell you that since last January, so I've got five individuals with cases before the court that have all gotten their own place.
Yep.
They are like learning to be on their own, be okay with being on their own. Different agencies helping them get furniture for their place and food and everything. And I know how many people are out there that are being victimized, and how many we deal with every day. But to me, 5 since like 2 Januaries ago, so 2023, who have actually gotten their own place because places aren't easy to get and they're on waiting lists forever. But the fact that we can go onto a housing list for them and up their, what do you call it? Like
Priority. Yeah.
priority listing. Yeah. The priority housing list has helped these individuals. And so now I'm just crossing my fingers that we're going to stay on this path and everything. But like, it's just actually felt good that everything everybody's doing is actually working. Cause I can say that 4 years ago, I could never look and say, oh, look at this person's, finally moving on. It's great. Yeah.
Well, that is a really happy note. Thanks, Tracy.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you sharing that. Kelly, you've got your hand up.
I want to just say something because I know how zealous people are to help, but I want to tell you how much harm has been caused to survivors by do-gooders that are not specialists in these areas. And, I see Sue blinking, and I saw Tracy and Gareth both nod. And let me tell you, it's not because you're not intelligent, you lack capacity, but you have to understand that as survivors kind of lead and help to assist in the legal system, in policing, in the aftercare. I've got survivors I've worked with for over 30 years. Mm-hmm. And so the relationship builds and the information that survivors can provide working in another role, both with somebody like Sue and her teams, with, Tracy and Gareth and I have been we've shared clients and things, and Sue and I have had discussions where we've been able to assist with clients, and that's to the client's credit, not to ours. But it's a privilege, and when we are able to glean that information. So I wouldn't say to an organization, go out tomorrow and you're going to be the ones buying the furniture and you're going to have access to survivors.
Yeah.
I don't care how well educated you are. I don't care what your speciality is. I dropped a comment in that I use when I present. You go and pick up the book at the MTO to drive. You are not handed a U-Haul to navigate in rush hour traffic on the 401 with your foot on the mat. This isn't something that you should be practicing on clients. And so if you support the legal system, if you support Sue in her efforts through the Crown's office and our OPP, your local police, your victim services, your women's shelter that get taxed with addressing this when they're really not equipped because they're trying to address all the other issues of gender, domestic violence, homelessness. If you're not equipped to help somebody to detox, you don't know what it's like to have somebody that's been part of a coerced crime who now has a criminal record and isn't able to get a job or rent a place. If you work within community, what you can do as an organization is find out who the experts are. You can talk to Gareth, myself, to Sue, to Tracy, or a myriad of other people that we can network you with that have a proven track record of helping support. So a survivor feels good about being a witness and can actually get a prosecution that's very difficult. And it's the aftermath of this. As a human trafficking survivor, this doesn't go away. And we are losing too many people, as Sue has alluded to drugs and addiction. So there's lots of areas that those that want to help and support that can. But I can tell you, Gareth and I have a little laugh. Every time we get a volunteer that comes through, they think that we're going to line them up with a survivor tomorrow and they're going to become best friends. And we've seen what happens with this. And it's not healthy for the survivor, but probably also not for the volunteer that doesn't understand how to navigate some of the trauma bonds, some of the trauma behaviors, some of the entrenched lifestyles that all of a sudden surface with triggers. And so we say to people that want to volunteer, talk to the experts, find out what's available, and then trust those that are experts in the field to help navigate that system with survivors until they're healthy enough that they're starting to self-direct in a normal life, like Tracy talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can do things like help run entrepreneurial courses. Survivors are very resourceful. They've lived that, they've lived to see today if we're working with them.
I think one of the things I'm seeing too a lot of, and is that we're getting survivors embedded with our investigative teams. So
Yep.
Carly's with Durham, Simone's with Ottawa, and the Quebec strategy, they now have their own strategy and teams like we do. Yep. What they're doing, and I don't know if you've heard about this, Sue, maybe you have or not, but I think it's a wonderful idea, is that if there are individuals like Carly or Simone who want to get involved in having lived experience and helping those that are trying to get out, they actually have like a pool that their teams, if they go out, they can call one of these individuals and they'll come out and help out. Because Gareth and I are passionate about this and know a lot about it. We don't have lived experience. And so to have someone like that available, even we have victim-centered teams with the OPP, but again, they've taken social work in university and they've done this, and some of them may have lived experience, some of them don't. And so I just know that how beneficial it is when Simone will come out or Carly engages or whatever, how great that can be. And it helps that 11 times come down to 4
or 2
or 2
or hopefully 1. And I can attest to this because Tracy's information, working with Gareth, we've what we call bird dogged a survivor all across Napanee, Belleville, Kingston. And what's really funny is even in conversation, I can share that even when if you have a team like that, when they jump off and they're not communicating, very often the first person they'll reach out to again is a survivor, because there's no shame or stigma when they're talking to another survivor. So to Tracy and Gareth, we just had an update on one of our friends that's positive.
Yeah.
And that's the work that needs to happen. And I think, to Sue's point, we need to move past awareness. Some people still need to be made aware, and that's free. So the province, PACO offices, different organizations, they can just point people online and you can become aware. But more than becoming aware of signs, we now need to understand behaviors. And when we understand behaviors, we're able to get in front of the crime to enact more prevention, and working in circles like Office of Security and Cooperation for Europe, and seeing the things they do through their survivor alliances and their conferences. They've actually developed codes of ethical practices for working with survivors and understanding at what point is it appropriate to ask a survivor to speak. And not tokenize them or re-stigmatize them. So I'm going to jump off. You guys can continue. I know Toby's got some really important questions.
There were some great questions from the group, actually. And one of the things, Tracy, you had mentioned that OPP has, Quebec has their own strategy moving forward. So one of the questions I have is, came up from Barb, and was specific to, do crowns work together across the nation in terms of managing trafficking activities, because a lot of times these things are happening across provincial borders, but maybe that's something we can extend to police services, or Gareth, in terms of your experiences in your different roles that you've had. Is that something that you're seeing work across the provincial boundaries in?
From the Crown perspective, yes. We have been trying to make contacts in all of the provinces. Some provinces like Nova Scotia, Quebec, Alberta just recently have human trafficking strategies, but others don't, or they're very minimal. They don't have dedicated prosecutors. So it could be any prosecutor dealing with a human trafficking case. So it's harder to make connections with those provinces who don't have a dedicated or a designated contact person for human trafficking. Manitoba just recently identified 2 people. And we actually, this week, we're having our Crown training at the University of Western Ontario, and we've invited prosecutors from other provinces to attend. So there will be prosecutors there from Saskatchewan, Newfoundland, and BC. So that's all really helpful in making those connections so that we can, connect with each other. We have had cases where traffickers here have also been charged in other provinces, like British Columbia this past year. And we've connected with the crowns there to make sure that our prosecutions are, in sync, for lack of a better word. But yes, there's certain things, like when there is a case where a person is trafficked in more than one province, then we have to, work with the police in those other provinces and the prosecutors to make sure we're all agreed as to where the charges will be laid, because they could be laid in any of our provinces that, where something happened related to the offense. Yeah, so, and then from the police, I know that same thing, when you have either the IJFS, the OPP, or municipal police agency in Ontario, they will connect with law enforcement in the other provinces where the victim was trafficked to collect evidence. Sometimes they need help with arresting traffickers who they take out a warrant for, who are actually in another province. The police here in Ontario work very closely with the provincial team in Quebec. Quebec is the only other province that has, well, actually Nova Scotia now does have a provincial anti-HT investigative unit as well. So all 3 of our provinces work pretty closely together because we do see both victims being trafficked across those 3 provinces and traffickers also active in all 3 of our provinces.
Well, and Gareth, you had mentioned, that a lot of times you'll see cases come up in different regions, and folks popping up in different parole offices across, the province. But I'm guessing that extends obviously across the nation too. And how does that work? Tracy, if you want to handle more on policing, and Gareth, in terms of your experience, how that works cross-border.
Yeah, no, for us, it's just like Sue was saying, we work very closely with, I'll say right now, quite closely with Quebec and Nova Scotia, actually, with one of our projects we have on the go right now. And then we're just flying out in next week, I think, to arrest an individual in BC who actually most of the offenses were Ontario, so Ontario's prosecuting, but it actually got picked up in a homicide investigation in Quebec. So, I mean, yeah, we work really closely with all of our policing partners across the country. Yeah.
I think it's important with Tracy's point too, to also understand that those that are entrenched in criminal activities often have side hustles in their criminal element. So they might be picked up on other charges, other things, all kinds of stuff. And that's why those indicators that Ontario has been able to put into the system assist both the police and the prosecutors. Gareth, you're up.
Yeah, I was just gonna say more so from at least, you know, that the reactive post court lens, I guess I would say, especially, you know, from probation and parole. A lot of it, I have only had one experience where it was interprovincial, and unfortunately our reach is I can flag it and I can put an alert on the file, I can flag it and make notes and kind of that sort of regard. But if there is anything proceeding, of course, that's where we definitely lean in. And my first call would be Tracy, and that's where we lean in on police, because we are that post court kind of aspect. But the great thing that I do have experience in understanding with probation, other workers that are not cops per se, is sometimes we get a lot more information. They will start talking to us more. We have names, I have addresses, and sometimes I'm trying to store these in my brain as they're talking to me, and I madly type them down once they leave. But that's where we can kind of work more in tandem. But ours is a lot more of that data information collection. And then if, of course, it does proceed, that's where we lean kind of back on that proactive approach with police versus ours is kind of after the fact.
Thanks very much. And in that line, one of the other questions that came in, it was a little kind of the same idea in terms of working together, but it was regarding here in Ontario, which ministries or how many ministries and who's coming to the table collectively to think about, I guess, not only the prosecution end of things, but the prevention end of things, just dealing with human trafficking in general. Who's showing up at the table?
So many ministries, so education is there, and that's a big piece of the prevention and awareness. Ministry of Transportation, Ministry of Solicitor General on the policing side, and probation and intelligence sharing, Ministry of Health. There's a ton more.
MCCSS.
Yes. That's the big one. That's where the Provincial Anti-Human Trafficking Strategy and Victim Services both reside, or the Victim Quick Response Program, which is the additional funding that is available to victims of human trafficking when they need things like immediate needs, like shelter, food, transportation to counseling, treatment, etc. There's additional money that's available through our Provincial Anti-Human Trafficking Strategy for victims of human trafficking that isn't available, say, to domestic violence or sexual assault victims. I think those are the main ones, although I'm sure there's more that I'm forgetting. But it is very much a cross-government approach to combating human trafficking.
The government is doing a great job of addressing this, and Ontario has been primary since 2017 in taking a very proactive role in all areas of this. It's taken them a while to sort out where each part of the puzzle falls, and there was a major shift from Minister of Justice office when Sylvia Jones was there to MCCSS. So it's taken them a while to kind of get the transition in, look at the interconnectivity of the issues and kind of redefine responsibilities and roles. But can I say that it's been an incredibly smooth transition, considering how those pockets of money, who's responsible for it, who the decision makers are. And organizationally, we've had access as Business and Professional Women, National Council of Women. We actually took a delegation of 12 organizations to our Ontario MPPs and hosted a lunch and just needed to talk to them about their commitments. And then there's also a minister that is involved in Ontario that is actually responsible for municipality funding and prioritizing the housing. And that's actually in the Ontario MPP sector. So just understanding where all that all that sits takes a lot of navigation. If you're a survivor and you're trying to navigate that and you're trying to navigate systems, it's even more difficult. And so having the coordination with police, with our crowns and our offices, with probation and parole, with organizations and agencies, victim services, that nobody holds the whole answer to the puzzle together. We're putting those answers together, and we are seeing, convictions that are sticking, that are very difficult. And let me just say this, as somebody that's worked with over 850 survivors in their exiting attempts and their lives going forward, they want to see traffickers convicted for the crimes that they committed, but it's very difficult to get those convictions. So we do appreciate all the work, but how can we encourage that? How can we increase it? How can we eliminate trafficking of vulnerable persons in our province, I guess, is the question we should be asking one another. And so we pose the question to those that are online with us today. There are things that you can do. There's work. You have Sue's information. You have Tracy's information, Gareth's information. If you're not a BPW member, find out how you can be involved in an organization that wants to do the work, to make the jobs easier of those. There's things right here on this panel that none of us can share. And we wouldn't want to. You'd need counseling and support yourself. And we need to change that in our province. And we have opportunities to do it not only in our province, but with BPW, we can operate this in Canada. Start bragging about the Ontario strategy and the effects that coming together and collaborating have had. And push your provinces, if you're from another province and you're listening, or even globally. How do we have those diplomatic dialogues to work together? And the people that are here on panel are people that I trust, that they do their job, they do it well, and they're passionate about it. Because let me tell you, it's not easy to get up and go to work every day and do this. So I want people to understand how grateful we need to be for what we do have in Ontario.
It's funny, I'll just mention this, Kelly. So last week or the week before, my team went to Ottawa or Quebec actually, and we met with some dignitaries from Jordan.
Oh yeah.
And
UN Special Rapporteur Assam Alim.
Yeah, and it was interesting because we needed a translator, so we had to go slow and stuff, but they were here to learn from us about how to deal with human trafficking in terms of investigation and community support. And so we're starting to be the go-to people.
Yep.
Yeah.
Look at what you guys are doing. I applaud you. And, I actually work with the UN Special Rapporteur's office as a UN representative for BPW International. And we have this reputation, people. So I know sorry. I'm sorry for taking liberty, but I don't often get to publicly commend the people that make a difference. So I'm celebrating you guys on panel. You make my job easier.
It's been just such an amazing evening. And some of the questions we can't get to, I'll just highlight that conceptually, and maybe that's something that can come out again later, but there were questions about what kind of ways they're being developed to combat some of the technologies that are more challenging, like Snapchat, for example, where there's no records of things being kept, and how are we, how is that impacting the landscape? Alternatively, what kind of technologies are coming about for, police forces and law enforcement forces in general across the nation and other, I guess, offices that are involved. Technology, how is that impacting cooperation to help combat things as well? There was also a question about how, looking for examples of how advocates and leaders and professionals have positively impacted your work, and certainly a lot of questions on prevention. So, generating a lot of conversation here this evening, a wonderful panel of speakers at unfathomable amount of experience. And thank you so much for sharing. And Kelly, I'm going to just turn this back to you to close out as you wish. I know it's 8:30 here, and thanks for staying with us for a couple extra minutes, folks. Mike.
The one thing that I need to say is how much appreciation is for those that are professional and at the level that are passionate about their work that you're hearing from. In each segment, as we've had a series in this, we're not done. There are so many different tentacles in this issue. There's so many avenues that we need to explore as those that believe in human rights and justice organizationally. And just as good people, I say the number one thing that people can do is to be the good human in the fight against human trafficking. And understand that you do not have the right to speak for a survivor. You don't. Too many people tokenize and own our stories. And I want to remind us, as I do at the end of every session we've had, they're not stories. They're actually lived experiences. So I thank you for those that are on panel. I have so much respect. I have so much respect, not only for you and your work, but how you work with dignity and integrity. And I will sing that song all day long. I know you're like, no, Gareth gets this all the time from me. Nobody rescues survivors except police and firefighters, but we can offer those that are looking to exit the opportunity to self-direct away from an entrenched lifestyle and a situation. And I can tell you at 62 years of age, if you will work together with us in prevention, that there will not be a survivor 62 years from now on screen sharing a story like I have.
Thank you, Kelly. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you so much, Kelly.
Appreciate all the work you're doing.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Kelly.
Gareth. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Susan. As they put in the chat, it's been an absolute honor to be part of BPW Hastings and Prince Edward and to host this evening. Thank you to those who made this possible, to those who showed up, but really so much. Thank you to those who are working in this diligently, tirelessly, every day to improve the situation. And I look forward to seeing some of you at the event in August, and we'll certainly look for other opportunities to get together and share these messages, learn from you, and find out how we can assist.
I'm going to ask the panelists to stay on as we say goodbye to everybody, so I can prove to my husband I'm not doing retail therapy.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everyone that came.